Writing. What's up, guys? I wanted to show you guys a bit of my process going through um, a work that I've done. So this is the most recent book that I've written. It is the only one that I haven't had um, kind of some outside eyes look at the whole thing before. Um, so it's still very much a first draft. So I just kind of wanted to show you what would it be like. I'm going to take you through the first 5 pages of kind of process with that. Um, this is also the attachment that I sent in the first email I sent you guys. And if I didn't include the attachment, let me know. I had to send some of those emails a couple of times because the systems aren't always super clear. It was for some reason only sending to half of you. So if I forgot to send it the second time, just let me know and I can send you the attachment. I would love to get feedback from you guys about the whole thing if you want to read it and give feedback. Um, but really, we're going to look at the process of looking at something. So I haven't read, well, full disclosure, I've read the first 5 pages because I actually did not hit record for this first time video. So the comments are already there. I already wrote them, but I'll take you through the process. Um, so one thing with this text is I did write it in 4 different viewpoints. You can see it's called In the Cards, title, 4 viewpoints. Originally, I was writing in 2 viewpoints, then I opened it up to 4. So all 4 major characters do get a choice. So the chapters, and then who is telling the story. Or who's all third person, but who is the focal point? Who are we like following around? Like, remember I've talked about like there's like a little dragon that's following the character around, seeing what they're seeing. Um, so my number one tip when you're editing is uh, to read it out loud. You'll find some of these comments I've made are very much the oopsies, didn't realize that until you actually read it out loud. And part of that is because your brain reads so much quicker, and it's basically making assumptions as you read. And to slow it down so that it sort of stops doing that is to read out loud. It also helps to see if your characters sound weird or awkward. So here we go. Corvo laid the cards one by one onto the ragged metal edge that made up the roof of the refuge. Even though the darkness felt like the sun was never going to return, Cor knew what was on the cards without seeing them. He could feel their stories rush up through his fingers and paint a tapestry across the night sky, destinies that etched themselves one shuffle at a time. So I just want to talk quickly about this paragraph. We've talked a lot about beginnings and what they should convey and what they do convey, and what I wanted to accomplish, I'm not 100% sure I have, is I wanted to try to establish a few things. One, I wanted to establish that Corvo, the main character in this section, is able to kind of tell the future with cards. I wanted there to be sort of a little bit of a haunting aspect to it, a little bit dark. Kind of that tone is some of my favorite writing. One of the reasons why I recommend things like Six of Crows duology or the Raven Boy cycle is they kind of have that haunting, mystical nature. That it's not like brightly colored magic. It's like this more dirty, urban kind of thing. Maybe you get what I'm saying. Maybe you don't. Hard to tell. And if you were like, oh, I feel like I read this before, I gave you guys the first about 5 pages a few months ago to read, and I'm not 100% sure this is the same version. So while this is a first draft, excuse me, I have edited it at different times throughout, so I'm not sure what version you guys read, but it will be similar. Same, 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 he sighed, quaffing the cards into a pile with one hand. Horse scratched at his neck before putting the cards back into the leather pouch on his hip. The cards had been showing him a vague darkness that was coming, but the details were always too fuzzy to do anything about. And the reason I have a note here is that some of the things you guys brought up when I was reading your comments was you didn't like the repetition here. And, you know, at the time, it was fresh off an edit, and so I was like, no, that's what I want to say. But sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, what are we really trying to get across? And the thing that I am trying to get across is that this darkness is has been looming, that it's been there for a while, and he feels like he can't escape it. Um, that kind of the idea that like reading the future isn't always the best, especially if you don't know what's really happening. You just kind of have the feeling. That's why I have the repetition, um, but I'm not sure it needs it. So I just have written a note because I'm not going to make decisions right now. While I'm also trying to make a video that doesn't, it's multitasking, and I don't know if I want to do it. But I have put a note of like, how else can I convey this information, the information that I just kind of told you guys about. So here we go. Kor looked down at his right hand and stretched his fingers. Ever since he had left his home in Hadron, he had a harder time understanding the messages the cards were giving. It was like things were getting lost in translation, like wool coating the mouth of the fates, leaving their hints and headlines muffled. He rubbed his left hand over the bumps and disfigurements of his right. Acid would do that to a person. Acid could fray the connections. So again, I'm still kind of trying to develop the character for the people who are reading. And, sometimes when you've written, let's see, how many... There's 262 pages of this document. There's 68,150 words. It is sometimes hard to go back into what you have written and have a clear mind, which is why I recommend you guys do things like writers groups or have other people look at it, because I've known this character at this point for probably 200 pages, even, of how many pages did I just say this was? Word count? 262 pages, and that's probably edited, so probably 300 to 350 pages that I've written about this character. I know him, but the readers don't, and so I want to make sure that they know things about him. And one of the things I need them to know is that his right hand, has been disfigured with acid. And that's going to come up a lot in the text because it's kind of a touch point. And if you want readers to remember something, you need to mention it at least 3 times so that they remember. And this is going to get mentioned a lot more than 3 times. I think even in this first 5 pages, it's like 4 or 5. But this is a really big thing that I think people need to remember so that later on when it's used, it's useful. So that is something that I do wonder at times, is it overkill? So something to keep in mind. Staying up here all by yourself? Air asked, pulling herself up the last rung of the rusted metal ladder that brought her to the edge of the roof. Is anyone besides you going to be stupid enough to come up here with me? Kor asked, taking in her nightly dazzlement of color, forced on her by the nightclub she sang for down the road. Bright red lips and painted cheeks hid her harsh features from the random passerby, but Corvo knew her beyond the makeup. She was beautiful in the way that a sword is beautiful. She had purpose and severity. The bar tried to hold her back with feathers and beads, but she was a spring ready for action. She was also his oldest friend. And for me, I kind of like when characters are described this way, like not trying to like, oh, I'm so good at character description, but one of the reasons I like it is I don't keep track of when I'm reading. I often read very quickly, and I don't often keep track of like what color their hair is or how tall they are. So I kind of like being told things that I can imagine for myself. Like she has harsh features, okay, I can kind of imagine that, and kind of fill in the pieces as we go. And I like descriptions of characters that really help me understand who they are versus just what they look like. But I do think that is something of a flaw for my writing, is that I don't spend a lot of time on what characters look like. In fact, one of the biggest notes to myself is I'm not sure I ever describe what Corvo looks like beyond maybe his eye color at one point and his skin color. but I think that might be it. And I think that might also be it for some of the other characters as well. So it's just something that I know, like, I don't mind that in reading and writing, but I do realize that, like, other people look for those things. So it's something that I'm curious how I could add on more to my writing. So let's keep going. For a guy who always complains of the cold, you could find somewhere a little more protected from the elements, she said. Cord just smiled and tapped his olive knuckles against the metal pipes around him. The smoke from the furnace below wafted in ripples to his touch. Plenty warm. He sighed, looking down to the papers Air had brought him. I'm going to say at the papers Air had brought him. It just flows easier. He shifted through them without letting his eyes read anything of importance. The stacks of papers, the information from his sources, they were only getting smaller every day. And just like the cards, he knew what they said without looking. Nothing good. So I really actually like the nothing good being on its own line. It gives it a lot of emphasis and a lot of kind of makes the reader pay attention. If you're ever like me and sometimes you're reading and you or get excited about something, you skip to kind of a line, that's the line you're going to be skipping to, and it's going to make you go back and reread. I also appreciate that I'm doing all these hand gestures that you guys cannot see, so appreciate that. I think even if you were the richest person in all Tel Aviv, you would still sit up here, Air said, drawing her long, slim legs closer to her body. But I'd own the building, Cor laughed. There was an awkward silence as the weight of what the building was forced its way into the ease of their conversation. Now, I marked this, the last time I tried to make this video, as awkward and to rephrase it, and I go back and forth, and I think I really need to sit and ask myself, what is it that I'm trying to say, and what is it that I want the reader to know from this conversation? And what I want the reader to know is that what the building that they're sitting on top of, the refuge, is part of the thing that is haunting them and haunting this conversation and haunting the papers, and I think that's not quite clear in this sentence, so I think it is something I would want to rewrite. Below them lay the prison where they re-educated people with magic, kept them from being nuisances to the public, helped them find the right way. A chill ripped through Cor. He shifted so his back was against the smokestack directly. It wasn't hot enough to burn, and the heat did its best to penetrate deep into his bones. He still shivered. Admit you're cold, Air said, placing a hand on his shoulder. His warmth melted into him in a way that the smokestack could not. It's only because you bring your silly winds with you. We are back here, so let's start right where we were. It's only because you bring all your silly winds with you, Cor said, settling the paper in front of him with a rock. See, this is another reason why you should read everything out loud, because you find all these little mistakes. And I've probably read the first 10 pages of this story 50 times, and I told you guys this is already take 2, and I still didn't find that until right now. The winds were as much a part of Air as his cards. He could not separate her from them if he tried. You know I can't help that. The winds were tied to Air like the cards called out to I can't talk today. To Corvo. So my note over here that I found is, this is really repetitive, and I'm wondering if this is from a different edit or a different version, and one that didn't necessarily have this up here. So I would probably, again, I'm not going to make super big changes while I'm making this video, just so that I have my full focus on it when I do. But one of the things I do like about Google Docs is if I decide I want to get rid of all these changes, I can always go back and do that. If you guys don't know how to do that, I can show it to you another day. So my note is, it's repetitive. Would I keep it? Probably I wouldn't. I'll probably take this line out and just go from here, from magic trickled, and kind of let it be. But I do think I added this part in now that I'm thinking about it, because I was thinking that I hadn't really discussed how magic worked in this world, or I should have done it earlier. So I think this was added later, probably without going back and figuring out how it connected up here. So then we have, let's keep going. Besides, I don't hear you complain about the winds when they bring you information, Air said, wiping the back of her hand across the lipstick streaking across her lips. The gray air made the remnants look menacing. And I have a note here about the word menacing. So I like this idea of her transforming in this moment, but I also wonder how much it defines her. And it defines her as this very severe um, person a little early, that she kind of becomes one dimensional. And I wonder instead if I use something like haunted or haunting, that if we get a little bit more sympathy for her, a little bit more human element, so that her character arc can be more of an arc and less of a flat line. So we'll keep going. Did they? Cor asked, looking away from her. Perhaps. She plucked a feather from her hair and let it drop off the side of the building. Cor watched it float until it had been lost in the darkness of the morning. Bryce and Marin are already dealing with it, Air said, picking another small feather apart. You sent Bryce and Marin without asking me? Do I need to ask your permission? Her tone was playful, but her eyes missed the sense of humor. Air was always on edge. He knew better than to remind her he was the leader of their rebellion. It would only end badly for him. So again, this is a moment where I wonder if we need this kind of menacing up here, because it's very clear that she's a very, like, edged person. So that's just something of, like, how much do you need to retell something before it becomes obvious? Do you think they can handle it? Cor said finally. Alone, I mean. They're not little kids anymore, Cor. You were doing much more dangerous things when you were their age, Air said, finally laying the skeleton of the feather drop. Cor didn't bother to watch that one. He rubbed his hand instead, pulling it into his lap. I just want... He started looking at the crack of sunshine that just started to crest the walls of the city. To protect them. I know, Air said, laying her long, thin fingers on Cor's shoulder again. He reached up and brushed them with his fingertips. Even the feeling of her skin felt muffled. He wondered for a minute what it would be like to hold her with both his hands at full capacity. So I just put a note here in the original recording that I did of that they are in a relationship. That's something that has been ongoing. It's not new. It's not a new thing that's going to happen within this story. But I did just realize that the first way she's introduced is his oldest friend, and is not ever really clearly expresses anything else until this moment. And this almost makes it feel like he wants it, but it's not happening. And that's not accurate. So I wonder how I can hint at that relationship earlier and kind of go from there. So that's kind of where I was with that one. Bryce has had too many close encounters with the Watchers lately. If he gets another fight, he's going to get thrown into the refuge again, Cor said heavily. Risks have to be taken in order for us to gain any sort of ground in this fight. You know that more than any of us. Cor looked up at the sky to ignore the clear stare Air had given his hand. It'd been 5 years, but he still wasn't used to it. Still wasn't used to the stare. Still wasn't used to the mumbling reading of the cards. Still wasn't used to not being able to clearly make out the Raven's Head brand that all magics were first to wear. If it was as something that was so much a part of his existence had been wiped out, like he would never be whole. So, again, there's the same mention of his hand, and I think I'm not feeling like it's overkill yet, but it is something that if we keep doing these videos, I would be interested in your comments on, of as these characters develop, do we get sort of stuck in a few details about them, or is it enough to be reminded that it's significant, it's going to come up, but without being like, pay attention to the blinking light, right? So we'll stop there. Maybe we'll do the rest of the chapter or get to know some of the newer characters. But I am interested. This is something that I plan on kind of doing anyway this month, is kind of editing and doing some more writing. So if guys would like to come along with that, just let me know.